Okay, today we're going to talk about how we set up a data table. Just some background that if you remember, when we talked about scientific method, we discussed recording data. And when we get that data, once we write it all down, we like to organize it into data tables so it's a little bit easier to understand. Okay, but before we do that, we have to set up what type of data we're going to collect, what we're going to collect, when we're going to do it, where we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. Okay. These are some things we need to consider before we even start an experiment. Okay, after we decided what the rules are to collect our data, we're going to create a data table. Okay, this will help us organize our information and make it much easier to analyze and see and get a better visual representation of what's going on here, okay, in our experiment. And based upon what's in that data table, we're going to construct other visual tools like graphs, pie charts, line graphs, bar graphs. So when setting up a data table, we first need to follow a few steps. Okay? Our first step with setting up a data table is to give it a title. Usually the title will include the part of the problem in it, restated in a sentence. Okay? So for example, if our problem was, how does sunlight affect the growth of grass? The title of our data table might be the effect of sunlight on grass growth. Okay, the second thing to do when setting up a data table is to identify the variables. The independent variable and the dependent variable. Remember, the independent or X variable is also referred to as the manipulated variable, which means you change it changes. It's the one you change to see the effects of it on the dependent variable. So to measure the effects, you measure how the independent variable affects the dependent variable, which is often referred to as the measured variable. So in the example above, the effect of hours of sunlight, so the hours of sunlight would be our independent variable. Okay? And our measured variable, what we'd be measuring, is our grass growth. Usually in our classes, we're going to measure it using the metric system, so we'll measure that in centimeters. So your independent variable, which is the sunlight, and your dependent variable, which is the grass growth. And I said that as I marked it up oppositely. So you have your independent variable, which is your X variable, which is your sunlight, and your dependent variable, which is your Y variable, as your grass growth. Okay. Now, when we set up the data table, we have to decide which column each variable is going to be listed in. And we like to put the independent variable in the X column and the dependent variable in the Y column, and we usually like to line those up as left and right respectively. So the X variable goes in the left, the Y variable in the right. Okay, so let's go to the next page and we'll fill in our chart based on some information. Okay, here it says give an appropriate title to the data table, label each column, organize the following data into ascending order of sunlight, hours we should say, because that's what they're measuring in and down below. So while investigating how sunlight affects the growth of ryegrass, or hours of sunlight affect the growth of ryegrass, a scientist collected the following data. Now, we're going to make sure that we put it in orders of ascending hours of sunlight. So we start at 2, goes to 4, to 6, 8, 10, and 12. But there's a few steps we have to do first. First, we have to give our data table, the title. The effect of hours of sunlight on the growth of grass, growth of ryegrass. You're just going to restate what it says up here. So we have our title, the effective hours of sunlight on the growth. It should say ryegrass, but I ran out of space. So in the left column, which is our X column, we're going to put hours of sunlight. In our Y column, we're going to put the growth of ryegrass in centimeters. Now, this is key for this column, for both columns, hours and centimeters. What units you're measuring in, if you put it at the top of the column, you don't have to list it next to all the numbers below. It makes your life a lot easier. If you leave it out, if you just put sunlight and growth, you have to put it after each number you record. So let's just go through and write down what we have. We had hours of sunlight, so we said it had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Okay, now the corresponding measurements at 2 hours of sunlight, you had 22 centimeters of growth. At 4 hours of sunlight, you had 8 centimeters of growth. It doesn't matter. If it doesn't make sense to you, that doesn't matter. You just have to write down what you recorded. You can't change your data just because you think it's not right. Just write down what you recorded. Okay? So at 6 hours of sunlight, you had 10 centimeters of growth. At 8 hours of sunlight, where are you? You're right here. You had 16 centimeters of growth. At 10 hours of sunlight, up top here, you had 22 centimeters of growth. And at 12 hours of sunlight, you had 18 centimeters of growth. Okay? So that's how we would fill out a data table. It's in, if you notice, once again, it's in ascending order from smallest number of hours to greatest. Okay? Small to large, that's called ascending. Okay? So if you have any questions, please write them down, bring them in. We'll try and answer to you as we circulate throughout the classroom. Make sure you take notes on this, because if you have a quiz or a science starter, you may be asked to write it down. Okay? Have a good night.